Today I'd like to talk to you about our first exhibition in Asia, Art Basel Hong Kong and Galerie Urs Meile, Beijing, May 2018. As artists, we are always faced challenges that we have to resolve, and this one was very, very particular. So we were on our way to Art Basel Hong Kong, and when we arrived, we got a message that our artwork would not arrive in Hong Kong in time for the art fair. Now, there were two possibilities. I had nothing to show, and several other artists had nothing to show, or I would produce a series of artworks in Hong Kong in the 3 following days, including framing, to be ready for the opening of Art Basel Hong Kong. We feverishly tried to find a solution. I was able to send a series of 30 by 30 centimeters pieces of wood mounted with paper. Through the gallery, I was able to find an assistant in Hong Kong. I had material sent from China. My room and my bathroom in the hotel, within hours, was turned into an artist studio, a laboratory. Everything was covered with plastic, and I set up my studio in my bathroom, basically. I had the great luck that my sister-in-law was able to fly in from Tokyo, and we basically started to create a series of 8 small pigment works. We were making miracles happen, and I had an incredible framer that created these amazing plexiglass containers for the artworks, and Art Basel opened up and the paintings were hanging, and that was my first opening in Hong Kong at Galerie Urs Meile. And like so many times, it doesn't really matter how you get there. The only thing that really counts is the end results, and I like the paintings actually so much, and the ones we didn't sell are now hanging in our house here in Zurich. The next step was our major installation in Beijing, and I call it major because everybody that was involved said, "Michel, this is too ambitious. Nobody can produce 600 squares in ceramic." That's how many I had to make, minimum, to basically make the installation that we planned in May. My technical assistant from Jingdezhen, whose father is an expert in ceramics and teaches in the University of Jingdezhen, which is the imperial city of ceramic, the place where we would produce this very, very large piece of work, simulating a glacier wall. So we went to the drawing board. I started drawing up my installation, my imaginary installation. A few days later, we flew to Jingdezhen, met everybody. My friend Shoshi from Los Angeles, a Japanese artist in ceramics, came to help me, and we started cutting squares in clay, vertical lines in clay that we started laying out on roofs of several buildings to dry, that we then intended to put together. The whole thing seemed very, very abstract because we worked in alleyways, in buildings, in galleries, and in a very, very modern contemporary art complex in Jingdezhen, where we built a very large makeshift studio for our works on paper as well. And we started proceeding, and then going back to Beijing, we started setting up our artist studio, which were formerly the old Galerie of Urs Meile. The complex was the old Ai Weiwei studio in Beijing. And this is where we lived and we worked, and again, we had to separate our living quarters from our working quarters because the studio and the small living area where we lived was very tightly connected. And I started with a wonderful assistant to prep my canvases, which were 280 by 170 centimeters, several very, very large pieces of wood covered with several layers of Chinese papers that we then started prepping and setting up in the studio. I started my first layers with blue pigment and salt water, layer after layer, day by day. My studio started going from snow white to light blue to darker blue. Then we started using black carbon because the idea was to put the carbon output from the glacier masses over my blue pigment to show the influence of the carbon. Our white moon suits, as we called them, started getting from white to gray to black. In the end, we were dark black shadows working in that space. Again, it was an extraordinary experience because I never worked on such large pigment works since I was an art restorer working on the Yves Klein retrospective at the Beaubourg in 1978-79. The first very large work became very, very beautiful, and when you looked at the painting against the white wall, first the painting was entirely black, and when you were standing in front of the painting, the strong blue indigo came through the black pigment. So once that done, we packed back up and we flew back on the next plane to Jingdezhen, and we started continuing putting our square ceramic cubes together week by week, more and more, until we had 600 pieces together. The very interesting part on this story, again, were our test pieces. When we started testing the colors to create the white and the black, some of our tests turned grass green or gray or green blue or green brown, and these pieces had an extraordinary beauty. About 8 or 10 of them are hanging here in my studio, and if you visit my studio tour on YouTube and Instagram, you can see these pieces in my studio. Now, this was the first episode on my exhibition in China. We're going to talk about the second episode of the exhibition in China tomorrow. I see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. This is Michel. Until tomorrow.